Alright guys, what's up? This is going to be part 4 in my beginner bladesmith hand forged knife series. So in our last video, this is where we left off. We did the heat treatment on the blade. We got a nice hard blade, we checked it with a file. And what we're going to go over in this video is putting in the grinds on the bevel. So when we forged the blade, we forged in the bevels a little bit on the blade. That helps out a lot. My knife, I notice, has kind of a pretty good arch on it. If I would have noticed this when I was forging it, I would have probably straightened this out a little bit, but that's fine. You know, it makes the knife unique. It's still comfortable. It'll still work. So what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to grind in the final grinds and basically get this just about to a finished edge. I won't put the actual sharp edge on it yet, although it is fairly thin already, so I'm not going to have to do a lot of grinding to finish this up. And I'm only going to go maybe a ½ inch or so up the blade. So I want to leave all of this up here raw looking. I got some good hammer marks in there, which I don't know if it's showing up or not on the camera. My camera doesn't really autofocus too well. So that's where we're at. I'm going to do a quick diagram to show you what we're looking for when we do this or when you're grinding any knife. So we'll get to that part. Thanks for tuning in. Okay. So I'm going to do a quick sketch to show you what we're looking to do on this grinding. So I'm going to draw a couple quick diagrams, and basically what this is going to be is if you were looking down the knife from the point towards the handle. So the blade edge will be up, the spine of the knife will be down. So what we're starting with, we'll just go like this, and we'll say this is your blade, right? This is before we did any of the bevel or any of the grinding or whatnot. So you're looking at it, this is the tip, you're looking down to the handle, the end of the handle. So your center line for your edge is going to be right here, let's say. Now when you're doing your grinding, what I did initially before the heat treatment, where I was talking about grinding in your 45s. So what you want to do, I'll draw this a little bit bigger since it's not showing up all that well. Alright, so this is your knife blade. So when you grind in your 45s, you still have your center line, right? And then you have the very edge of your blade, and then you grind in 45s. So this is the initial grinding that you do prior to heat treatment. So when you grind in your 45s, it's about a 45-degree angle, which is what they say when you grind in your 45s. Now when you do this initial grind, what you're doing is you're reducing the thickness of your blade down to your cutting edge pre-heat treatment. So you don't want to go too thin here, or you'll get, you know, warping when you try to do the heat treatment, which is what I showed, I think, in a previous video. On this blade here, yeah, it's a lot more apparent here, but you can see how this blade is warped, and that's because I did the initial grind on it too thin prior to the heat treat. So this knife is ruined because it can't be fixed. So I could take this and bring the edge all the way up here and cut it back, maybe do something, but it's not going to be the knife I intended it to be. So when you do your grind, you want to do your 45s first. That's what they mean by grinding in your 45s. Now, you can do additional grinding in this prior to heat treatment if you want to. But like I was saying, with the belts that you have available nowadays, you don't really have to worry about grinding a hardened blade. You could basically harden your blade square like this and still grind out a full bevel. You would have no problems. So from this point, what you want to do is you basically want to map out your knife, right? So let's say I want to have a ½ inch bevel on here. So I'd get a set of calipers and I would basically put in my line, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen. I'll just do it with a Sharpie real quick. You're basically wanting to follow the profile of your edge, and this is still, you know, completely up to you what you want to do, right? I mean, that's the great thing about knife making, is you can do pretty much whatever you want. I mean, if you like it, somebody else will probably like it. I don't know if that's showing up all that well because it's black on black, but you can kind of see the Sharpie line there. So anyway, what you want to do with that, so you have your 45s cut, right? So let's say I just drew my Sharpie line right here. So this is going to be our Sharpie line, right? So your next step that you want to do is you want to bring this point here and this point here together. So you're going to start grinding at an angle that will bring those 2 points together. So as you do this, your blade's going to do this. I'll draw a little bit bigger picture. There's your center line, your 45. So here's my bevel line that I drew. So basically what you want to do is you want to grind to this point to establish your bevel. Alright? So that's going to mean removing this point. Now up to that point, when you're here, you know, there, you're going to have multiple facets, they call it. So you're going to have a smooth edge here. So if you're looking at your blade, you have your initial 45, and then you start grinding in your bevel. Let's say that's the line we did. You're going to have another grind line here. So you're going to have a ground edge here, and you're going to have your initial 45 ground edge here. So these are facets. So what you want to do is you basically want to make this into one facet, which will be your bevel. So as you're grinding in this direction, you want to keep your angles consistent. And you know, once you do a bunch of knives, you can get really good at this doing it by hand. You can also buy jigs to assist you with this. Some guys use, you know, a piece of wood. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you could do it to grind in your bevels to get a nice consistent edge. All those things will give you a good edge, but really what you want to do is you want to learn how to do it by hand. You want to be able to freehand it, and that's going to be the best way, because all that those tools are doing, which I'm not bagging on them. I've used jigs before too. I still do use them on some knives, but that's because I haven't made a lot of knives. You know, I've made, I think I'm in the range of like 35, 40 knives so far. So I'm still nowhere near to a point where I'm good for free grinding. You know, I do a pretty good job, but I'm not great at it. So basically what you want to do is you want to grind this edge in. Once you get this point here, which is your initial edge, which is all the way back here, and this point here to where they meet, then you have a nice flat grind in there. And you'll do that on both sides, right? And then what you want to do is you basically want to take that flat grind, you want to maintain that edge or that angle, and you want to bring the flat grind in. So once you get both of these points in, you have one nice flat edge along here, and you may have ripples in it or whatnot. That's fine. That's all going to be part of learning. So once you have that edge in there, which this is also going to round, you know, the tip of your knife, unless you have a square point at the bottom, then you won't have to worry about rounding it so much. Then basically what you want to do is you want to take that edge and you want to bring it in to where your cutting edge is at near zero. So you're going to bring your initial 45 from this point into, let's say, this point. So once you have that much narrow edge, I'll draw it much smaller now, you have your bevel, and then the rest of your blade. So this is your freshly ground edge, your bevel. You have a point here that's about the size of maybe 1 millimeter or so. And then what you're going to do after that, this will be the last step in the process. I never sharpen my knives until the very end. because when you're handling the knife and doing other stuff, putting a handle on, you know, whatever you're doing to the knife, you don't want to have an edge on there first off, which when I first started making knives, I put an edge on it right away. I'm like, oh cool, this is actually a knife. And I cut myself. So now I've learned that's the last thing that I do. So when you're doing that, you have your bevel ground in, you have a couple options here when you actually do your cutting edge. You can do another very small facet that will give you your cutting edge. And this is also going to be determined by what you want to use the knife for. If you want to do what they call a convex edge, where your edge is going to look kind of more like an apple seed, is what everyone says. So this is your apple seed. That's your apple seed, right? That's a convex edge. What this does is it gives you a much sturdier edge, cutting edge, but it'll never be as sharp as, let's say, a razor edge, which is, you know, or a like a chisel edge, which goes straight to a point like that, or a razor edge, you know, which goes directly to a point. So these will be different things that you'll learn as you make knives on what you like to do and what you want to make. But those are all the options. So basically that's the process of grinding. You want to go from your 45 to your flats, bring it into a 0, and then you'll put on your finishing cutting edge at the very end. This is after you do handles and whatever hand sanding you want to do on the blade. I hope that was clear. Alright, I'm going to try to keep this somewhat brief just because of the noise and everything. So I'm going to just use a old 60 grit belt. You can start with an 80, a 120, whatever you have. Basically it's just how quick you want to get through doing it. So I have an old 60 grit belt here. This should remove what I need to. I don't need to remove a lot here. It's going to be pretty quick. One thing you want to remember when you're grinding, especially after you've heat treated your knife, that just about every pass that you do, you want to dip your knife in water to cool it off. And the other thing when you're grinding, which you'll learn this like as you do more knives, you basically want to use one finger, and you could do this, I'm just using, you know, nitrile gloves, they're very thin. You want to be able to feel the heat, because at this point you don't want your knife to get too hot and to get ruined. So you basically use your finger to support, and then you move your blade like this. That's where you get your angle. You may want to go back a little bit on the handle, because as you're coming in, you don't want to hit your knuckle in there. So you're basically going to do this. You're going to lock your elbows in, do your support, put in your angle, and then you want to kind of move with your hips side to side as you're grinding your knife. Now, as you get better at this, you'll learn your technique or whatever works best for you. But that's just a general guide. You want to kind of keep your arms locked, keep your angle locked, move your blade across, and if you're going to round off the edge, you'll kind of do this sort of a move. You switch to the other side, same thing. Get your same angle, support with your thumb here, round it off. So I'm going to need very little on here. And one thing also to learn too is when you're grinding, especially when you're first starting, if you have a variable speed control on your grinder, you want to just crank it up and you want to go. But the best thing that I've learned, and I still, you know, have to like remind myself of this, is to slow down. Slow your grinder down, take your time, get the grinds nice and consistent and flat as best as you can. Again, I'm still no expert. I'm like just learning this myself. So I've made, like I said, I think getting close to 40 knives now. So surely I have a long ways to go. They say you need to make at least 100 knives before you can consider yourself a knife maker. So I'm working on it. All right, here we go. So you see my start of my grind here, and basically what I'm doing is as I'm grinding, I'm changing the angle of the knife slightly like this. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring this line, this ground line, it's going to bring it down. So as you turn the knife this way, it's going to bring the grind down. If you wanted to do a flat grind across this whole thing, you could just go immediately straight to the flats, but I'm trying to retain this part up here. So I'm almost there. I'm going to go maybe another 1/4 of an inch roughly. You probably can't see my line on here anymore, but I'm about halfway at this point. This point's a little bit further. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to show up or not, but you can see the multiple facets here. Up here I have a pretty good flat grind. Here though you can still see my initial 45 grind, which goes to about right here, and then you can see this grind. So what that's telling me is that on the back side I'm backing off of it too much, so I need to maintain my angle that I have here across the entire blade. Alright, I think that's about where I want it for this side. So basically then you're going to just go and do the matching thing on the other side. And when you're doing this, you want to kind of constantly be checking back and forth to make sure that you're hitting about the same line. That's why doing the scribe lines really helps. I didn't show that in this video, but I mean it's super simple. You use blue Dicom, you can do a Sharpie, scribe it on there. Calipers work really well because you can set it to an exact size and just run it along the edge of the blade. Get a nice sharp line there. So I'm going to do a little bit more grinding, finish this up. Alright guys, so that's pretty much it. That's where I'm going to leave it. Now, if you want to make this a finer looking edge, you can just take it up on the belts through whatever grit you want to go up to for whatever type of a finish you want to get. I'm going to leave this like this because I want this knife to look pretty much raw. I want the 60 grit lines in there, and then when I go back to put in the edge, it'll be a finer grit. That'll be on the next video though. Alright, let's go back out. Alright guys, gonna just give you a quick look at the knife and where it's at. So this is my initial grind. It's pretty flat. It's not perfect, of course, but it's a pretty good flat grind. On the other side here, you can see. And then depending on the type of knives that you make or the type of knives that you want to make, you know, a lot of guys sell knives like this, and it's a look that a lot of people like. You know, they like seeing the rough grind marks in the blade like that, and it works great. I do, you know, knives both ways. I do some that are very rustic looking, some that are, you know, finished out chef's knives, you know, that are sanded up to, you know, 15 or 1800 grit. But that's where the knife is ended up. After the grind, I have a very thin edge here. So it's going to be, I mean, it's pretty close to being sharp now. There is just a slight bit of flat, especially at the back here. It's slightly thicker. Up here, it's almost to an edge yet. There's no edge on there yet, but it's very close. So what we're going to go to now is we're going to go to prepping the handle. This is the handle that I'm going to put on this knife. This is a set of hybrid scales. This is from Casting Kings, which he is on Instagram, and he has a website. I will put that in the link below in the description. So this is what is considered hybrid scales. There's two different kinds of wood here, which I don't remember exactly what they are. This is a mix of colored epoxy here, and there's a little bit of the metal honeycomb there in the center. So this is the set of scales that I picked for this knife, so this is the one that I'm going to use. Now basically the way that we're going to prepare the handle for this knife is we're going to basically clamp the knife on, and this is kind of an important step. So when you're looking at how your knife handle is going to be laid out and the handle material that you're using, whatever it is, you want to kind of position the knife in a spot that you think will look good. So if you want to pick up more of this lighter colored, epoxy, you'd go down to the bottom, up to the top. If you want to flip it around the other way, whichever way you want to do it. So I like this smoother grained wood going towards the front. I think that'll be better for when I'm actually putting in, the angle of the front piece for the handle. So I'm going to pretty much just center this right on here, and then we're going to go from there. Now the way that I do this is I get the block positioned, as wherever I want it, and then I have these Kant twist clamps, they're called, which if you can see the name there, K-A-N-T. You can find these pretty much anywhere. I bought them on Amazon. They are a little bit pricey, but they're awesome clamps. They clamp down really good. They hold things really securely, and they come in all different sizes. So basically what's going to happen there, this clamp has a larger pad and a smaller pad. So whenever I do this, I put the larger pad on the bottom towards the wood. And you see how there's a couple different surfaces here? I try to use the one that has the X in it or just the flat, so that I have more surface space on the wood and I don't crush the wood. Basically you just slip it on there, and sometimes you gotta widen it out a little bit like that, get it in place, and then you want to tighten it down. Now this is actually over the epoxy on that back, so I don't want to tighten it down super tight. You can probably hear a little bit of creaking there. So it's pretty firm right now. You don't need to do this extremely tight, but you want to have it fairly snug because you don't want it moving once you start drilling your holes. So I'm going to put 2 of these on just to make sure. And I also use 1, 2, 3 blocks when I drill, so a lot of times I'm putting a 1, 2, 3 block in the middle, which if you don't know what a 1, 2, 3 block, that's this. So it's basically 1 inch by 2 inch by 3 inch. That's where the name 1, 2, 3 block comes from. And I like to put them in the center, so I put my clamps so that they're spaced apart enough that I could still put this in the center underneath. So I'm going to need to move this other one out a little bit more. Now they do have holes in the 1, 2, 3 clamps, or the 1, 2, 3 blocks, so if you wanted to try to drill down through the hole, you could definitely line it up that way. I'm only picking up this rear and the front pin. These two I just put in for a little lightening on the handle to take some of the weight out of it, which you can do or not do, that's up to you. So that's basically the setup, and then we're going to go to the drill press. Alright guys, we're set up at the drill press. I'm using a 1/4 inch drill bit because that's going to be the size pins that I'm going to be using. Now these holes in the tang of the blade are actually just larger than 1/4 inch. So one thing when you're prepping your handle or doing your drilling, whatever size pins you plan to put in, you probably want to make your blade or the holes in your tang slightly larger than that. And they could be quite a bit larger than that, but you don't want to be like gigantic, you don't want to do a 1/2 inch hole and then put an 1/8 inch pin in there. It would still probably work, but you want to stay kind of close to the size that you're doing. So these are just slightly over 1/4 inch size, and then I'll be drilling a 1/4 inch hole through the wood. That's one thing that you have to pay attention to when you're planning out your knife. As far as what you're going to do for attaching your handle, pin work, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to use 2 1/4 inch pins in here, front and rear, and that's going to be what's going to happen. So let's go to drill. Another thing, when you're drilling, you want to, in case the knife catches for whatever reason, you want to have it past you. So I have the knife extending out this way, so if the drill happens to catch it, it's going to swing away from me, right? That's just a simple safety precaution. You don't want to have the knife over here like this, and your hand here, and then all of a sudden the drill bit catches and comes around and slices your hand. And you don't want that. Especially if you made the mistake of putting an edge on there first. That's one of the reasons, another one of the reasons why I don't put a finished edge on there. So let's go ahead and get these holes drilled real quick. Alright, so my holes are drilled. Back to the desk. Alright, we're back at the desk. When you drill these, you want to make sure to leave the clamps on there. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to take a Sharpie, which this is a reach Sharpie they call it. So basically what it has is a very narrow point. You can use a regular pencil, any kind of Sharpie, whatever. This one is actually made to go inside holes. But then what I like to do is I like to run a line around my entire handle before removing the clamps. To give me a nice line. And then the other thing that you want to do is you want to look at your blade and you want to figure out how you want the front of your handle to be. If you want it to be rounded, if you want it to be a flat, if you want it to be whatever shape you want it to be. And basically what you're going to do from there is you're going to do some marks. So I'm going to take this all the way to this forward edge because this ricasso area or choil, like whatever you want to call this area here, is a little bit long and narrow. So I'm going to basically go all the way to this edge, which if I would have put my knife a little bit further back, it would have given me more to play with here, but I think I still got plenty. So I'm going to basically go all the way from this edge, and I'm going to go down about halfway on this finger hole. So let's say right there. And then that's where I'm going to end the lower part of my forward handle section. So after that, pull these off. Now I have my line there. So basically what I'm going to do is continue it across, which this is probably out of focus right now, but so we have our handle shape right there. From this point, what you want to do is you want to prep your pins, and you can either use drill bits to put in here, or you can put your pins in there, and then you can rough cut this or even grind it if you want to, the shape of this out. The important part of this is this front part here. The rest of this doesn't really matter because all that can be ground off after you glue your scales up. So this front portion here, you want to figure out what you want to do with that before gluing it onto the knife. Because once it's glued onto the knife, you're not going to have a lot of choices as far as sanding and whatnot up here without messing up your blade. Again, on this blade, it's a totally rustic, rough blade, so it probably wouldn't really matter. But if you have a brushed finish or a polished finish on your blade, then you definitely will not be able to do anything on the forward part of the handle. So you want to take care of this as much as you can prior to actually doing the glue up. So I'm going to get my pins prepped a little and get this together and then go cut it out. I'm probably not going to show that on camera because it's pretty self-explanatory. Alright guys, so here's my handles. As you can see, I took a little bit off. I didn't really bother getting it too tight around my drawn-in line. And if you look at it from this angle, I put a little bit of a taper on it here, a little bit of a taper on it here, and then I did my initial slice, which is what I drew for the forward part. So it'll be something like this. And then basically on this leading edge, I did 220 pass, and then I did a 400 grit pass. Basically just to kind of give it a little bit of a shine, a little bit of a, a clean, smooth surface. Not super concerned about it because this knife is going to be, like I said, somewhat rustic. So the entire handle will probably only be sanded up to 400, maybe 600 grit. So that's it. I got the pins cut. The pins you could do, you know, how much extra or how much little you want. You know, it just has to be enough to go through the handle and the blade itself. Alright, the rough fit up of my scales. So that's the handle, or will be the handle. And I think that's where I'm going to end this episode. And we'll have one more in this series, and it'll basically be gluing on the handles and then finishing out the handles. So this is where our knife is at. Hopefully that's focusing. I have some brass mosaic pins, the hybrid scales, and that's it. So I just wanted to say thank you guys for tuning in again and for watching this series. And if you like what you see, give me a like, give me a subscribe if you like. And if you have any questions, put them in the description down below or ask questions down there, or you can contact me on Instagram. Thanks for watching. Bye.